The sky that morning looked like it had forgotten how to be warm. It stretched wide and pale above the town, a thin sheet of quiet gray, as if the sun had chosen not to rise all the way. October had settled in gently, but there was something heavier beneath it, something that lingered in the wind and pressed softly against the chest. The grass outside the town bent low, dry and whispering, like it knew a story no one wanted to hear out loud. And along that narrow dirt road, where the earth cracked beneath tired footsteps, Eliza May walked away. She did not look back, not because she was strong, but because she had already looked back too many times before and nothing had ever been waiting for her there. Her dress, once a soft shade of blue, had faded into something quieter, something that blended too easily with the dust. A blanket was folded over her arm, a small satchel hanging from her shoulder. Inside it, a tin cup, a few scraps of food, and a journal she had not written in for months. There are moments in a person's life that do not arrive with thunder or shouting. They come softly. So softly, in fact, that by the time you understand what has happened, it is already over. The night before had been one of those moments. Caleb had stood by the doorway, his hand resting against the wooden frame as if even that required effort. He did not raise his voice. He did not throw anything. He did not even look angry. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, he looked tired in a way that made her feel like a weight he had been carrying for too long. "You don't fit here anymore, Eliza." The words had landed gently. Too gently. She had waited for more. For explanation. For something she could hold on to, even if it hurt. But nothing came. Just silence. The kind that fills a room until there is no air left to breathe. Eliza had nodded because there was nothing else to do when someone decides you no longer belong. She did not argue. She did not ask him to reconsider. Some part of her already knew. Maybe she had always known. So she packed in the dark, moving carefully, as if making too much noise might break something that had already been broken beyond repair. Outside, a few lanterns flickered along the street. Shadows stretched long and thin across the ground, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once before falling quiet again. Old Martha had been the only one who stepped forward when Eliza reached the edge of town. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed a small bundle into Eliza's palm, a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. "You keep walking, child," she had said softly. "Don't let the cold make a home in you." Eliza had managed a small smile, the kind that barely lifts the corners of the lips. "Thank you." That was all. No promises to return. No words about tomorrow. Just gratitude, carried gently between two women who understood more than they said. A boy stood nearby, half hidden behind a fence post. Thomas, barefoot, curious, his eyes wide with questions he didn't know how to ask. He watched her like she was something leaving that might never come back. Maybe she was. The road beyond the town did not welcome her. It stretched forward in long, uneven lines, cutting through fields that had grown tired of trying. The air carried a chill that settled deep into her bones, and with each step, the world seemed to grow quieter. There is a particular kind of silence that follows rejection. It is not empty. It is full of things unsaid, of memories that replay without permission, of questions that have no answers. Eliza walked through that silence. Hours passed, though time no longer felt like something she could measure. The sun moved slowly, casting thin light across the land before sinking behind distant hills. By the time night came, the cold had sharpened. She found a small cluster of rocks and curled beside them, wrapping her blanket tightly around herself. Sleep did not come easily. It hovered just out of reach, like something uncertain whether it should stay. Her thoughts drifted back, not to Caleb's words, but to the spaces between them. The way he had stopped looking at her weeks ago. The way conversations had grown shorter, thinner. The way she had begun to feel like a guest in a place she once called home. Perhaps leaving had not begun that night. Perhaps it had begun long before, in all the quiet ways people let each other go. Morning came without ceremony. A thin light crept across the land, and Eliza rose with stiff limbs and a body that felt heavier than it had the day before. She drank a small sip of water, ate a piece of bread, and continued walking. There was no plan, only movement. By midday, the land began to change. The ground grew uneven, scattered with larger stones and patches of wild growth that had somehow survived where everything else had not. It was there, between two jagged ridges of rock, that she saw it. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shadow, a dark opening carved into the earth, half hidden by the curve of the land. The kind of place most people would pass without noticing, or avoid, even if they did. But Eliza was not most people anymore. She stepped closer, cautious but curious, her fingers brushing lightly against the cool surface of the stone. The air near the entrance felt different, warmer, not by much, just enough to be noticed. She hesitated. There's always a moment, standing at the edge of the unknown, when you must decide whether to turn back or step forward. Eliza stepped forward. Inside, the cave opened slowly, the darkness giving way to soft, shifting shadows. The walls curved gently, holding the space like quiet arms that asked for nothing in return. And deeper within, there was something else. A faint sound. Water. She followed it, her footsteps careful, her breath steady, until she saw it. A small pool, nestled within the heart of the cave. Steam rose from its surface in thin, ghost-like strands, curling upward and disappearing into the air. A hot spring. For a long moment, she simply stood there, unsure if it was real. The world had not offered her kindness in a long time. It felt strange, almost unsettling, to find something that did. Slowly, she set her things down. Her hands trembled slightly as she dipped her fingers into the water. Warm. Not just warm, but comforting in a way she had almost forgotten existed. Eliza sank into the spring carefully, the heat wrapping around her like something familiar, something patient. Her shoulders lowered, her breath softened, and for the first time since she had left, the tightness in her chest began to loosen. The cave did not ask her questions. It did not judge her silence. It did not turn away from her quiet. It simply held her there. As the steam rose around her and the world outside faded into distance, Eliza closed her eyes. Not in fear, but in something softer, something that felt, just for a moment, like peace. Morning inside the cave did not arrive with color. It came as a slow light, a quiet softening of shadows along the stone walls, as if the darkness itself had decided to step aside rather than be chased away. Eliza woke to the sound of water. Not loud, not demanding, just the steady, patient rhythm of the spring, like a heartbeat that did not belong to her, yet somehow steadied her own. For a moment, she did not move. She lay wrapped in her blanket near the edge of the pool, watching the thin veil of steam rise and disappear, as though the cave was breathing in its sleep. It had been a long time since she woke without fear sitting beside her. A long time since morning did not feel like something to endure. She sat up slowly, her body still carrying the memory of the road, but something inside her had shifted, not healed, not yet, but quieter, less sharp. There's a kind of pain that softens when it is no longer watched. And here, in this hidden place, no one was watching. Days began to shape themselves gently. There were no clocks, no voices calling her name, no expectations waiting like unspoken rules, only the simple rhythm of living. She gathered fallen branches from the land outside, her hands growing familiar with their weight and texture. She learned which paths were easier to walk, which stones shifted beneath her feet, which winds carried colder nights. The wilderness did not offer comfort, but offered honesty. And for Eliza, that was enough. She spoke very little. At first, because there was no one to speak to, then because she realized she did not need to. The silence here was not empty. It was full in a way she had never known before. Full of small things that would have gone unnoticed in her old life. The way sunlight slipped into the cave for a brief hour each afternoon, touching the water just enough to make it shimmer like something alive. The faint scent of minerals rising with the steam. The distant call of birds that passed overhead but never stayed. At night, she would sit near the spring, her feet resting in the warmth, her journal open in her lap. For a long time, the pages remained blank. Not because she had nothing to say, but because the words felt unnecessary. What she was feeling could not be captured easily. It was not loud enough, not clear enough. It was something in between, a quiet rebuilding of something she had not realized was broken. One evening, without thinking too much about it, she wrote a single line. "I'm still here." She stared at those words for a long while. Not with pride, not with sadness, just with recognition. The days stretched on, each one folding softly into the next. And slowly, the heaviness she had carried began to loosen its grip. Not disappear, but change. Like a storm that had moved far enough away that its thunder became distant, almost forgotten. It was on a late afternoon, when the light had turned golden and thin, that the stillness shifted. Eliza was outside the cave, kneeling near a patch of stubborn grass, gathering what little she could find when she felt it. Not a sound, not exactly, but a presence. The kind that makes the air feel different. She straightened slowly, her breath catching just slightly as her eyes moved across the open land. And then she saw him, a figure in the distance, moving with steady steps, not hurried, not lost, just arriving. Her first instinct was not fear. It was uncertainty. She had grown used to the world belonging only to her again. And now, suddenly, it did not. The man approached without hesitation, though his pace remained calm, respectful, as if he understood that some spaces required gentleness. When he was close enough to be seen clearly, she noticed the quietness in him. Not the kind that hides something, the kind that has already made peace with it. His name, she would later learn, was Daniel Reed. But in that moment, names did not matter. He stopped a short distance away, his gaze taking in the cave entrance, the faint curl of steam behind her, and then finally her. There was no surprise in his eyes, no judgment, only a quiet acknowledgement, as though he had expected to find something here, even if he did not know what. "Cold night coming," he said softly, his voice low, steady. "I was looking for shelter." Eliza hesitated, not because she did not want to answer, but because she was no longer used to being spoken to. There was a small pause, then she nodded. There is space inside. That was all. No questions, no conditions, just an offering. Daniel did not step forward immediately. He gave her that moment, that small space of choice, before moving past her into the cave. It was a simple thing, but it mattered more than he knew. Inside, the cave seemed to hold its breath for a moment, as if adjusting to this new presence. Eliza watched as he set his things down near the entrance, keeping a respectful distance from the spring, from her, from everything that felt like it belonged to her. He did not ask how long she had been there. He did not ask why. He simply existed in the space without trying to shape it. That night, they shared the quiet, the kind of quiet that does not press or demand, but allows. At some point, he offered a small portion of dried meat from his pack. She accepted with a nod, no words exchanged, but something understood. Days passed, and he remained, not as an intruder, not as a guest, but as something in between. They spoke, sometimes, short sentences, simple observations. "The weather will turn soon. There's a stream a mile west, nearly dry. Tracks in the sand this morning, deer maybe." Nothing personal, nothing that reached too deep, and yet something was building. Not quickly, not loudly, but steadily. Daniel listened in a way Eliza had never known before. Not waiting to respond, not searching for something to fix, just listening. And in that quiet attention, she felt something unfamiliar begin to grow. Safety, not the kind that comes from walls or locks, but the kind that comes from being seen without being judged. One evening, as the light faded and the cave returned to its soft shadows, he spoke a little more than usual. "Town east of here is struggling," he said. "Crops failing. Water's near gone." Eliza felt something tighten faintly in her chest. Not fear, not quite, just a distant echo of something she had left behind. She did not ask more, and he did not push. That was the way of things between them. What needed to be said would be said, in time. That night, as she sat by the spring, her journal resting in her hands, she wrote again. Not much, just another small truth. "This place found me before I found myself." She closed the journal gently, her gaze drifting toward the cave entrance, where the faint outline of Daniel could be seen against the night. For the first time in a long while, the future did not feel like something to fear. It felt open, unwritten, and as the steam rose softly into the quiet air, Eliza understood something she had not known before. She had not just survived leaving. She had begun becoming. The wind changed before anyone spoke of it. It came thinner, drier, carrying with it the faint taste of dust that settled on the tongue and stayed there, as if the land itself had begun to forget how to give. Eliza noticed it in the mornings first. The way the air no longer held even a trace of softness. The way the distant hills looked faded, like a memory, slowly slipping away. Daniel noticed it too. He said little as always, but there was a quiet weight in his movements now, something measured, something watchful. One evening, as the last lights stretched long across the cave walls, he sat near the entrance, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It won't hold much longer," he said. Eliza did not ask what he meant. She already knew. The town, the same place that had let her leave without turning its head, now standing on the edge of something it could not walk away from. She felt it then. Not anger, not even sadness, but a quiet pull like a thread tied somewhere deep inside her that had not been fully cut. She had buried that place in silence. But silence has a way of remembering. Days passed, and the signs grew clearer. The small stream Daniel had mentioned dried completely, its bed left cracked and empty. The birds no longer circled overhead. Even the wind seemed to move differently, as though searching for something it could no longer find. One afternoon, Daniel returned later than usual. There was dust on his coat, and something heavier in his eyes. "They're running out of water," he said simply. Eliza's hands stilled. Inside her, something shifted. Not sudden, not loud, but undeniable. The cave behind her breathed its steady warmth. The spring untouched, constant, hidden. Safe. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then quietly, almost to herself, "This place is not meant for many." Daniel did not argue. He nodded once, understanding the truth of it. But truth does not always make the choice easier. That night, Eliza did not sleep. She sat by the spring, her fingers resting just beneath the surface of the water, feeling its warmth, its quiet generosity. This place had held her when she had nothing left. It had asked nothing in return. And now, something was being asked of her, not by the town, not by Daniel, but by the part of her that had begun to change. There is a moment in every life when healing asks something back. Not comfort, not safety, but courage. She closed her eyes, her breath slow, steady, though her chest felt tight with something she could not name. She remembered the road, the way no one had followed, the way no one had called her back. She remembered Caleb's voice, soft, distant, final. "You don't fit here anymore." And for a moment, the old pain stirred, a quiet question rising beneath it. Why should I go back to those who never came for me? The cave answered nothing. It simply remained warm, patient, still. And in that stillness, Eliza understood something she had not before. This choice was not about them. It was about who she had become. Slowly, she opened her eyes. "We go at first light," she said. Daniel looked at her then, not surprised, not relieved, just steady. "I'll walk with you," he replied. And that was enough. Morning came quietly, the kind of morning that feels like the world is holding its breath. Eliza packed what little she needed, her movements calm, deliberate. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. But as she stepped away from the cave, she paused. Her gaze lingered on the entrance, on the faint curl of steam rising into the cool air. This place had been hers, not in ownership, but in belonging. And now, she was choosing to share it. Not because she had to, but because she could. The road back felt shorter. Or perhaps she had changed enough that distance no longer felt the same. The town appeared slowly on the horizon, its outline familiar and distant all at once. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The buildings stood as they always had, but there was a stillness to them now, a quiet strain that hung in the air like something waiting to break. People moved slowly, their faces drawn, their eyes searching for something that was no longer there. Water, hope, relief. Eliza stepped into the edge of the town without announcement. For a moment, no one noticed, and then someone did. A woman paused mid-step, her gaze narrowing slightly, as if trying to place a memory. Then another, and another, until the silence shifted. Eliza May. The name was not spoken aloud, but it moved through the air just the same. Old Martha was the first to approach. Her steps were slower now, her frame smaller, but her eyes, still kind, still searching. "You came back," she said softly. Eliza nodded once. Not for long. There was no bitterness in her voice. No accusation. Only truth. Daniel stepped forward slightly, his presence quiet but steady beside her. "There's water," he said. "Not far. Enough to help, if you're willing to follow." A ripple moved through the gathered crowd. Hope, fragile, uncertain, but there. And then, a familiar figure stepped forward. Caleb. He looked different. Not stronger. Not wiser. Just worn. Like a man who had spent too long waiting for something that never came. His eyes met Eliza's, and for a brief moment, the past stood between them. Unspoken. Unresolved. "I didn't think," he began, his voice quieter than she remembered. She did not let him finish. Not out of cruelty, but because some words no longer mattered. "There's no time for that now," she said gently. And there wasn't. The need was too great. The moment too fragile. People gathered what they could carry. Children were lifted, hands held tightly, fear and hope woven together in uncertain steps. Eliza turned, leading the way, not as someone seeking approval, not as someone returning, but as someone who had found something worth offering. The path to the cave stretched ahead, familiar beneath her feet. Behind her, the sound of many footsteps followed, at first hesitant, then steadier. The cave welcomed them without question, its quiet walls expanding to hold more than they were meant to. The spring remained untouched, its warmth rising steadily as if it had always been waiting. One by one, the townspeople stepped inside, some in disbelief, some in quiet relief, some with tears they did not try to hide. Eliza stood near the edge of the water, watching, not with pride, not with regret, but with a quiet understanding settling deep within her. This place had saved her, and now it was saving them. Daniel moved beside her, his presence as steady as ever. "You did this," he said softly. Eliza shook her head just slightly. "No." Her gaze rested on the water, on the people, on the life slowly returning to a space that had once been hers alone. This place was always meant to be found. A pause. Then, quieter still. "I just stopped hiding it." And in that moment, as the cave filled with breath and warmth and fragile hope, Eliza understood something that settled gently into her bones. She had not lost her sanctuary. She had given it meaning. And in doing so, she had found something far greater than safety. She had found her place. The cave was never meant to hold so many hearts. At night, the air grew thick with breath and quiet worry. The soft echoes of movement replaced the stillness Eliza had once known. Children slept close to their mothers, wrapped in shared blankets. Men sat near the entrance, watching shadows shift as if they could keep the world from breaking any further. And yet, the spring continued to rise in gentle warmth, unchanged, untroubled, as though it understood something the rest of them did not. Days passed in careful balance. Water was gathered slowly, respectfully. Food was shared in small portions. Voices stayed low, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the fragile thread holding everything together. Eliza moved among them without calling attention to herself. She showed them where the ground was safest to rest, how to keep the pathways clear, how to take only what was needed and leave the rest. She did not lead with authority. She led with quiet knowing. And somehow, that was enough. Daniel remained close, though never overbearing. He watched, he listened, he stepped in when needed, and stepped back when not. There were no grand words between them, only understanding. Even Caleb kept his distance, not out of resentment, but out of something softer, something that looked like regret settling into its rightful place. Sometimes, Eliza would catch his gaze lingering on her, not as he once had, not with ownership or expectation, but with the quiet realization of what he had failed to see. She did not turn away, but she did not return it either. Some doors, once closed, remained so, not out of bitterness, but out of growth. Then the storm came. It did not announce itself with thunder. It arrived in the wind, a low, rising sound that moved across the land like something alive, something searching. By nightfall, it had found them. The cave entrance howled with it, the air turning sharp and restless. Dust and cold rushed inward, swirling through the narrow opening, carrying the scent of something dangerous. People stirred. Fear moved quickly, passed from one to another without words. Daniel stepped toward the entrance, his jaw set, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond. Flash flood, he said under his breath. If the rain hits the ridge hard enough. He did not finish. He did not need to. The cave, their refuge, could become their trap. The first drops came soon after. Not gentle, not steady, but sudden, heavy, relentless. Rain struck the land above with a force that echoed down into the cave like distant drums. The ground trembled faintly, and somewhere beyond the entrance, water began to move. Fast, too fast. Panic followed. Voices rose, sharp and uncertain. People gathered their things, their children, their fears, all at once, as if movement alone could keep danger away. What do we do? Where do we go? We can't stay here. The questions collided, unanswered, and in the middle of it all, Eliza stood still, not frozen, not afraid, but steady. There are moments when the world fractures into noise, and someone must become quiet enough to hear what matters. She stepped forward, her voice not loud, but clear. "Move the supplies higher," she said, "away from the entrance. Keep the children near the back wall." The words did not demand. They guided. Daniel turned toward her, recognition flickering in his eyes, and without hesitation, he moved to help carry out what she had begun. Others followed, not because they were told, but because something in her steadiness gave them something they had lost. Direction. The water came faster now, a dark rush creeping toward the cave's mouth, spilling over stones, rising inch by inch. Eliza moved with purpose, her hands steady as she helped lift what little they had as safer ground. She knelt beside a frightened child, her voice soft, grounding, pulling the fear out of the air one breath at a time. "You're safe here," she murmured. "Stay close. Stay with me." And somehow, the child believed her, even as the storm raged, even as the water threatened. At the entrance, Caleb struggled with a loose barrier of rocks, his movements frantic, uncertain. The current pushed harder, undoing his efforts as quickly as he made them. "It won't hold," he said, panic threading through his voice. Eliza stepped beside him. For a brief moment, their eyes met, not as they once had, but as two people standing in the same storm, no longer defined by the past. "Angle them inward," she said calmly, her hands already moving. "Let the water split, not fight it." He hesitated, then followed. Together, they shifted the stones, not to block the force, but to guide it. The water surged, pressed, then divided. Not stopped, but softened. Enough. Sometimes survival does not come from resistance. It comes from understanding. The storm did not pass quickly. It stretched through the night, testing the cave, testing them, pressing against every fragile place. But the cave held, and so did they. By morning, the rain had quieted, the wind had softened, and the water had begun to retreat. A stillness settled slowly, carefully, like something returning after being gone too long. One by one, people stepped closer to the entrance, their eyes searching the land beyond. It was changed, washed clean in some places, broken in others, but still there, still standing. A breath moved through the cave, not relief alone, but something deeper. They had made it, not by chance, but together. Eliza stood near the entrance, the pale light of morning touching her face. The same light that had once watched her leave now found her here, unchanged in form, but entirely different in spirit. Behind her, the town gathered, not as it had been, but as something new, Caleb approached slowly, his steps careful, his voice quiet. "You saved us," he said. Eliza shook her head, her gaze still resting on the horizon. "No." A small pause. "We learned how to stand." And that was the truth of it. Daniel moved beside her, his presence as steady as the earth beneath them. He did not speak. He did not need to. Some bonds do not ask for words. They simply remain. Spring came gently after that. The land began to soften again, small hints of green pushing through the tired soil. The town rebuilt, not in the same way, but in a better one. Closer, kinder, more aware of what could be lost and what must be protected. The cave did not empty, nor did it belong to anyone. It became what it was always meant to be, a refuge. And Eliza, she no longer stood on the outside of things. She stood where she chose. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in quiet gold, she stood at the cave's edge, the warm breath of the spring behind her, the open world before her. She did not leave. Not this time. Because belonging is not about where you are asked to stay. It is about where you choose to stand and who you become when you do. And if you've ever felt cast out, unseen, or left behind by a place you once called home, maybe your story is not ending. Maybe it is only beginning to lead you somewhere you were always meant to find. If this story found a place in your heart, take a moment to hold on to it. Let it remind you of your own quiet strength. And if you feel like sharing, tell me where you're watching from. Leave a like, a comment, and stay a while longer. There are more stories waiting just like this one.